Hello and welcome to another episode of Business on the Wire. The Prime Minister announced a 20 lakh crore package that would go into rebuilding and restarting the economy. Through the week, the Finance Minister has been walking us through the steps and the nuances of it. The big takeaway seems to be that it's largely a spread of guarantee schemes and offers of credit. Meanwhile, Moody's observes that India will grow or not grow and go into a deep shock because of what's happened through COVID. So has this package and the details of it really addressed the pain points, and is this the best the government could do? To talk about that, joining me now is former Finance Minister P Chidambaram. Mr. Chidambaram, thank you so much for joining in. Towards the end of her announcements, in response to a question about the kind of direct cash transfer that's happened so far, the Finance Minister admitted it wasn't enough, but then said nothing will be enough given the circumstances. Would you agree with that observation?
I don't. See, what is a fiscal stimulus? The expenditure budget for 2020-21 has already provided rupees 30,42,230 crore. We'll assume for the time being that they will raise the money and spend the money through taxes, non-tax revenue, borrowing, etc., etc. But at that level of expenditure, the unanimous conclusion is India will go into a recession, negative growth. Let's assume zero growth. And if we want to stimulate the economy, we'll have to spend more. Nobody has come up with any other solution to stimulate the economy. We have to stimulate demand. Stimulating demand means government must spend more. Government must spend more means it must spend more than 30,42,230 crore, which has already been budgeted and approved by Parliament. But everything that the Finance Minister has announced, barring one or two items, is already in that 30,42,230 crore. So how will it stimulate demand? How will it stimulate the economy? I think there are many, many ways in which we can raise additional revenues, additional resources, and spend more. I think we should spend at least another 10 to 15 lakh crore more.
What is your estimate of what might have been the fiscal outgo so far, sir, from the announcements made?
Well, we'll start with the third tranche. Third tranche is zero. Because everything is already in the budget. Beekeeping is in the budget. Foot and mouth disease is in the budget. We are looking into the line items in the expenditure budget. We'll find every item. Now, second tranche, the most generous estimate is 5,000 crore. Practically, every analyst has agreed that the value of the additional fiscal measure is 5,000 crore. There's a lot of dispute about the first tranche. Most people have put it at 25,000 crore. I have been very generous to government and assume that the entire 3 lakh crore as collateral-free loan to MSME will be spent this year. It won't. There's a moratorium of 1 year. There is a loan period of 4 years. It's only what becomes NPA will be spent. But even assuming a most generous, but the entire 3 lakh will become NPA this year, the government guarantee will be invoked for the entire 3 lakh. It's only another 3 lakh crore. So, keeping aside the first tranche, I'm afraid it's only 5,000 crore.
How is that going to translate into the system, Mr. Chidambaram? As you pointed out, it's looking like 0 or -% growth. This looks like the bulk of what we're going to get in terms of any economic stimulus. Is it a drop in the ocean? Will it make any impact at all?
This won't make any difference. In a budget of 30,42,230 crore, what will 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 crore make a difference? I think yesterday it was very clear that the government had run out of steam. If the third tranche is 0 or close to 0, I can't imagine what the fourth and fifth tranche will be. She's already covered migrants. She's already covered poor families. She's already covered farmers, according to her. So what's left to cover now? Unless she comes with a big bang announcement for big business, large industries. But I speak to the chambers of commerce, nobody expects anything in the fourth and fifth tranche. But let's wait and see. Let's give the government the benefit of doubt until Sunday evening.
Before I get to the options that might have been available to the government, sir, the biggest pressure point and pain point has been the condition and the stress on the migrant laborers. I think enough has been said about putting cash directly in their hands. Could there have been a more elegant solution, sir, and the ability to put slightly more into their hands to help them tide over what looks like a humanitarian crisis at this point?
Absolutely. Remember, for years to come, the defining image of India in 2020 will not be the coronavirus infections or death. It will be this harrowing pictures, horrendous pictures of migrants walking with their wives, children, small possessions, clambering onto trucks, sleeping on railway tracks, pavements, getting killed. That will be the defining image. Now, every state is receiving the migrant. They are screening them, they are testing them, they are quarantining them, and then sending them home to the villages. So when they leave the quarantine and go home, give them 5,000 rupees per family. Assuming there are 1 crore migrants who return to the home states, it will cost you only 5,000 crore rupees. Assuming there are 2 crore migrants, it will cost you only 10,000 crore rupees. What's the big deal about spending 5,000 crore to 10,000 crore on migrants who are poor, hungry, tired, destituted, deeply in debt, and with no hope at all for the future? I would have simply given a cover containing 5,000 rupees per migrant family as they leave the quarantine.
What is stinging the government's hand so much, Mr. Chidambaram? I mean, this looks like a fairly simple solution. What we've heard up until now is a crisscross of credit guarantees, some kind of guarantee schemes, offers of slightly cheaper credit. They've raised their borrowing limit, of course, in the market. What is staining their hand from putting this money into the hands of people who deserve it or need it the most?
Because for most people, the simplest solution escapes them. The most elegant, most obvious solution escapes most people. Be that as it may. I think this government is a prisoner of two things. One, ignorance, and two, fear. Their own ignorance and their own fears have imprisoned this government.
I want to understand what you believe will be the picture as it plays out in rural India now, Mr. Chidambaram. As you mentioned yourself, there are swaths of people making their way back. This also means that the kind of remittances that were happening from urban pockets into rural go down. There are a larger number of people dependent now on small pockets of land. What do you think the face of rural India is going to be over the next few months and years?
See, rural India has two parts. One is the land-holding farmer and the tenant farmer. They will begin agriculture, but they can't do anything else. Even in the worst of years, they have to go back to their farm and start agriculture. So we will continue to produce grain and pulses and soya and all other things. So that part of the rural economy will start functioning. But what about the landless labor, the daily worker who's not a tenant farmer? What about the migrant worker who's returned from urban India? He will be completely without work. How much Manrega work can they give them? See, the real transfer of cash in Manrega is only when you take the average number of days each registered worker has got multiplied by the wage. The average has never crossed 40 days a year or 50 days a year. Although it's called a 100-day work program, it has never crossed 40 days a year. 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 40 very few states have touched 100 in some years. Therefore, except for Manrega work, there is no other work for these largely unskilled, some skilled labor which is returned to the villages. There will be social unrest, there will be conflict, there will be demands on the state governments which the state governments can't meet. I think we are in for a very serious crisis in rural India. One part of rural India, agricultural India, will work. The non-agricultural India has already come to a grinding halt.
Which brings me to the other section that is under intense pain, which is the entire MSME sector, Mr. Chidambaram. The Finance Minister, of course, announced a relief package for MSMEs in her first month. There seems to be a debate, though. The Minister says it's 5 lakh crores, the Expenditure Secretary says it's just 10,000 crores. Where then do you think the truth lies? And have we done enough to address the plight of the MSMEs?
Well, bravo, Expenditure Secretary. He's publicly contradicted a cabinet minister. Now the ball is in the cabinet minister's court. I hope he will respond today. If he doesn't respond, we will tweet tonight. The point is, Mr. Gadkari says 5 lakh crore is outstanding. I've spoken to chambers. They tell me up to 6 lakh crore is outstanding. Expenditure Secretary says it's only 770 crore and the maximum shown on their books is 10,000 crore. Now, it doesn't require a Sherlock Holmes to investigate the matter. All that they have to do is, and I will tweet today if there is no response from Mr. Gadkari, all that they have to do is ask every department, ministry of the government, there's a controller of general accounts officer in each ministry, each department, to within 3 days, by Monday, give the number of unpaid outstanding invoices in that department or ministry. It's there, it's on computer. Number 2, direct every PSU to get a certificate by Monday, signed by the Chief Finance Officer, countersigned by the external auditor, what according to their daybook and ledger is the outstanding unpaid invoices received from MSMEs. Just add up the number. It will take 72 hours. To resolve this conflict, all that the finance minister has to issue is a 1-paragraph memorandum today to the CGA, who's under her, and to the PSUs. The number will be known on Monday. Obviously, one of them is being economical with truth. It can't be 10,000 crore as well as 5 lakh crore.
I think Mr. Gadkari's point was that this included the center, states, PSUs, and private companies. But in your experience, it cannot be a number as low as that in the centers, can it?
Let's first get central government and PSUs, central PSUs. We can repeat that exercise for state governments and state PSUs. See, there is a portal in which MSMEs are expected to upload what is due. Now, that portal is never true because the PSU calls up the MSME, and I heard this from a top industrialist. The PSU calls the vendor and says, don't even think of loading this information on the portal. You will not get any further orders. What is the MSME supposed to do?
For many of these MSMEs, Mr. Chidambaram, the problem often is that they go bankrupt due to a lack of access to funds. How do you see it playing out for the MSMEs, especially given the small slice that was addressed in the finance minister's comments, as also the size of credit that has been given out? Does it make any difference, for example, what you do in terms of the rate of the loan?
See, the finance minister was fair to say that her package applies only to 45 lakh MSMEs. Most people seem to have overlooked that number. She very fairly said, the package which I'm announcing is 45 lakh MSMEs. There are a total of 6.3 crore MSMEs. I expected one of the journalists present to immediately ask her, ma'am, you said 45 lakh MSMEs. What about the remaining 5.8 crore MSMEs? They've been completely left high and dry. There's no collateral free loan for them. There's no credit guarantee for them. There is no subordinate debt for them. There is no fund of funds for them. There's nothing for them. They've been left for themselves. Many thousands will close down. Those who have stopped work will close down. So they won't expect anything more for MSMEs.
There is one observation, Mr. Chidambaram, that basically the government has shrugged its hands because of how poor its own situation is in terms of money, and that whichever way we may scramble, we're looking at a huge opening up on the fiscal deficit. Would you agree with that? What do you think the real picture might look like? And despite the fact that there's been such little fiscal outgo, do you think we're still up for quite a bit of pressure on our fiscal deficit?
As I said, they are prisoners of their own ignorance and own fears. I would not bother about the fiscal deficit. Anyway, it's going to go up. You're going to borrow an additional 4.2 lakh crore. Assuming that the denominator, GDP, remains constant, it is already 5.3. The GDP will shrink. So 5.3 will perhaps become 7 already. So what are you worried about the fiscal deficit now? If you have to borrow another 5 lakh crore, borrow another 5 lakh crore. And now practically everybody, even today, two chief economists of two of the banks have endorsed what we have been saying for the last 20 days. Monetize the part or whole of the fiscal deficit, which according to you is beyond a comfortable level. If you think you must monetize 3% of the fiscal deficit, monetize it. Even the most conservative central banker I know, former Governor Dr. Rangarajan, says, let's monetize the deficit. What's wrong with that?
This also brings us to the very dire situation for states, Mr. Chidambaram. I mean, they have been asking for a relaxation of FRBM norms. Yesterday, the Finance Minister of Kerala pointed out that given recent estimates, Kerala's economy will shrink by 10% if normalcy is restored within 3 months of lockdown, else it will be even worse, taking it back to levels it saw in the 1950s. Are you worried about the situation for the states, and what kind of support should or ought to have been given to them?
Of course I'm worried. Why are states being treated as though they are municipal administrations? The FRBM Act applies to both center and states. There is a limit of 3%, but there's an escape clause. The center has invoked the escape clause. States are begging, please allow us to borrow 1% more. They want to go from 3% to 4%. That 1% more, I've done some calculation, will give them an additional 2 lakh crore. If you're not willing to give a grant and aid of 2 lakh crore, allow the states to borrow an additional 2 lakh crore. They will borrow from their own people. They will borrow in India. Depending upon their financial position, they will get rates which are fine or rates which are a little high. But that depends upon the state's financial situation. Are we saying that Dr. Thomas Isaac or Manpreet Badal in Punjab or Amit Mitra in Bengal are less competent than the Economic Affairs Secretary in Delhi to decide what they should borrow? If the Economic Affairs Secretary in Delhi is competent to decide and advise the Finance Minister what the center should borrow, why are these finance ministers incompetent to get advice and decide what they should borrow? The whole approach of treating states and state finance ministers and state finance secretaries as though they are incompetent morons is completely unacceptable.
What also seems uncertain is the time process involved in rebuilding or healing from here, Mr. Chidambaram, even in terms of manufacturing activity or industrial activity. And many from industry have pointed out that this piecemeal approach is not helping industry get back on its feet. Should it have been done in this staggered manner? Should manufacturing have been shut down completely in the first place? Many of our peer countries like Vietnam actually did not do that.
No, I don't think you should compare Vietnam with India. You see, a lockdown was necessary. Without 21, say, plus another 19, 40-day lockdown, we could not have built the medical and health infrastructure to cope with the peak infection number that we will reach. When we will reach, I don't know. We already crossed 80,000. And if you take out those who have returned home, something like 60,000 require some kind of a medical treatment. We have bought time. We bought time to build the medical and health infrastructure. We have more hospital beds now, we have more ventilators, we have more masks, we have more PPE, we have more oxygen cylinders. So that, I think, was absolutely necessary. You could not have allowed manufacturing to continue while you stop everybody else's economic activity. That would have been invidious and completely unworkable. Therefore, the lockdown was correct. The lockdown has to be slowly lifted. We're not saying lifted overnight, gradually lifted. I think on that, the state chief ministers ultimately prevailed upon the Prime Minister. We'll know tonight or tomorrow whether the onus of imposing restrictions and allowing relaxations in a lockdown 4.0 will be left to the state governments. That's the right thing to do. That's a separate issue. But the government must have the wisdom how to have an exit strategy as and when the lockdown is relaxed or lifted. This government seems to have no exit strategy at all. They start running passenger trains on Tuesday at 4 p.m. and then they shut it down on Thursday. Now, what is the explanation why you started it on Tuesday at 4 p.m. and booked tickets up to June 30? And why did you shut it down on Thursday? As a railway minister who expounds on everything else, explain why this flip-flop in 48 hours.
You had the experience of having ridden through the most recent crisis, which was in 2008, Mr. Chidambaram, with the financial crisis. It was different, of course, because it came from within the financial system and spread to the rest of the country. This time, it's a pandemic. Even at this point, what are the 3 or 4 steps or lessons that you would urge the government to take heed of and take action even now? I mean, it's clear that the amount of input is not equal to the amount of economic activity that's been damaged. But what can we still do from here?
See, what has been done has been done. We can't retrace those steps. For example, we can't increase the number of tests retrospectively. Yeah. Question is, what do we do now? There's a consensus. We have to come out of the lockdown. Maybe it will start with lockdown 4.0. Maybe there will be a lockdown 5.0. I don't know. Whatever that be, let that take its course. First thing, stimulate demand among the poor. Unless the poor spend, there won't be any demand. It's goods of mass consumption, the poor spending small amounts of money, which will lift demand. So put money in the hands of the poor. So number 1 will be migrants. Every migrant family returning home, 5,000 rupees. 2, 13 crore families in the bottom half of the population. Give them 5,000 rupees plus grain every month. Certainly for the month of May 15 to June 15, and if necessary from June 15 to July 15, and if necessary again from July 15 to August 15. It will cost you 65,000 multiplied by 3. 195,000 crore, perfectly doable. Then address the 6.3 crore MSME needs, because unless they revive, 11 crore jobs are at stake. The 45 lakh MSMEs employ maybe a few thousand, or maybe 1 or 2 lakhs, or maybe let's say 45 lakhs into 5 or into 10 will make it only 4.5 crore. There are 11 crore employees. These are the cycle repair shops, the auto repair shops, the lathe works. These are the small services, laundry. Revive them. Unless you revive them, small towns will have no jobs at all. I come from a small town. They'll have no jobs at all. Every shopkeeper has 2 or 3 jobs. He has already dispensed with all except his own nephew or son. The other boys have to come back to the jobs. So revive the MSMEs. Then item 4, and we can't make a long list today. Item 4 will be address the problems of industry sectorally. With no one size fits all. Call the automobile industry, ask what their problems are. Call the airline industry, ask what their problems are. Leather industry, exports, pharmaceuticals. And address them sectorally. Some may want liquidity, some may want credit guarantee, some may want tax relief. You can address sectorally, and they will revive. But if you're a prisoner of ignorance, if you're a prisoner of fears, each of the steps that I've outlined to you, and I've been saying this for the last 30 days, falls on deaf ears. You don't listen to people.
My final question to you, sir. Much of this body blow to the economy is, of course, because of COVID, but it's not like we were standing at a strong point anyway. We came off of 7 quarters of, painful economic growth contraction. How long and how deep do you think this process of recovery is going to be? What's your sense of how many years ahead?
See, I can't resist saying that the 7-quarter slowdown was entirely attributable to the mismanagement of the BJP government. It didn't happen. Nobody imposed it upon us. There was no war. There was no boycott with the rest of the world. Just their incompetent management led to a 7-quarter continuous, relentless decline in the growth rate. Then the pandemic came. The longer you delay the right steps, the fiscal stimulus, the stimulating demand, the sectoral approach, the longer it will take to come out of this hole. We are digging a deeper hole every day. The time to act is today. If you act today, I'm pretty sure with competent management, wise management, listening to other people's voices, incorporating them. In April 2021, you can see the revival. This year is gone. There's nothing we can do about it. But if you don't do anything today, you're postponing the revival.
Thank you, Mr. Chidambaram. I appreciate your time and thoughts today. Thank you very much for joining in and speaking with us.
Thank you.